The Battle of Willow Lane, a tale of patience and justice. It was a sweltering August morning in the quiet suburb of Meadowbrook, Virginia, when I felt that uneasy prickle on the back of my neck, the kind that tells you you're being watched. I was knee-deep in mud, wrestling with the rusted frame of an old above-ground pool in my backyard at 214 Willow Lane. The liner was torn, the pump long dead, and my grandkids had outgrown splashing around in it. So there I was, a 68-year-old retired history teacher named Henry Coleman, covered in grime, wearing a faded t-shirt with a coffee stain that looked vaguely like Texas, when I glanced up and saw them, two men in what appeared to be police uniforms, standing at the edge of my property with clipboards. And right between them, like a general commanding her troops, was Margaret Abigail Wentworth. Let me paint you a picture of Margaret. She lived 3 houses down in a spotless colonial that could have been plucked from a magazine. She introduced herself as Margaret Abigail Wentworth every time we met, as if her name carried the weight of royalty. To her, our neighborhood was her kingdom, and she was its self-appointed queen. My modest ranch house, bought 20 years ago with my late wife, Clara, was a thorn in her side. Clara had loved this placette, planted the azaleas that burst into pink every spring, and insisted on the pool for our grandkids. But now, with the pool coming down and my lawn a muddy mess, Margaret saw her chance to strike. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her voice cutting through the humid air. "There he is, officers. That's the man ruining the beauty and safety of our community." The 2 men, big, burly types with mustaches that looked like they'd been glued on, stopped forward, their boots sinking into my soggy grass. I straightened up, wiped the sweat from my brow, and fixed them with a calm stare. I'd spent 30 years teaching high school history, dodging questions about whether George Washington invented the cherry pie. If Margaret thought she could rattle me, she was about to learn otherwise. Margaret's crusade against me started the day Clara and I moved in. She'd marched up our driveway with a welcome basket that held a stale muffin and a stack of HOA pamphlets, her eyes scanning our house like a health inspector. "I'm Margaret Abigail Wentworth," she declared, chair of the neighborhood aesthetic committee. "We have standards here." It was less a greeting and more a warning. Over the years, her complaints piled up. My grass was too long, my Christmas lights too bright. The oak tree in my front yard dropped leaves onto her pristine driveway. When Clara painted our door a vibrant red, her favorite color, Margaret sent a certified letter demanding we switch to approved neutral tones. Clara just laughed and planted red geraniums to match. But Margaret's pettiness turned cruel after Clara's death 4 years ago. I was drowning in grief, letting the yard go a bit wild, when she stormed onto my lawn, snapping photos with her phone. "This is unacceptable," she barked, as if my pain was a violation of her precious rules. That was the moment my patience began to crack. I didn't lash out, I am not that man, but I knew polite indifference wasn't enough anymore. Margaret wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was a bully, and her actions carried a quiet, corrosive prejudice that assumed I, a black man, didn't belong in her perfect suburb. Her latest stunt with the fake cops was the final straw. The 2 officers introduced themselves as Officer Brown and Officer Davis, claiming they were from the Regional Safety and Ordnance Bureau. Their uniforms were too crisp, their badges too shiny, and I recognized them instantly. Margaret's brothers, Carl and Eddie, whom I'd seen at the local hardware store and a disastrous barbecue where Eddie spilled mustard on his shirt. "Well, officers," I said, leaning against the pool frame, "you look an awful lot like Carl, who sells paint at Home Depot, and Eddie, who once fixed my sink and flooded my basement." Their faces froze. Margaret gasped, her perfectly coiffed hair trembling. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "These are public servants." I took a step forward, my voice steady. "Impersonating an officer is a crime, Margaret. Carl, Eddie, you're on my property, wearing costumes from a party store. I'm calling the real police." Carl tore off his fake mustache with a wince. Eddie dropped his clipboard. "It was just a prank," Eddie stammered. Margaret's eyes darted between them, her plan unraveling. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over 911. "You have one chance to leave," I said. They scurried off, Margaret's dignity trailing behind like a tattered flag. But this wasn't the end, it was the beginning. I wasn't going to let Margaret's 20-year campaign of harassment slide. My revenge would be slow, legal, and built on the very rules she worshipped. I had a plan, and it started with a survey. I hired a team to map my property lines, and the results were gold. The azalea bush Margaret hated? 2 feet inside my land. Her pristine lawn? Creeping 6 inches onto my side. And the kicker, a corner of her fancy concrete patio, where she sipped her iced tea, extended 4 inches over my property line. I said nothing, letting the orange survey flags stand as silent sentinels. I saw her glaring at them from her window, her face a mask of fury. Next, I called an old student, Nathan Harper, now a sharp land use attorney in Richmond. He confirmed the HOA was a paper tiger, its bylaws were vague, and Margaret's aesthetic committee had no real power. Armed with this, I painted my front door a blazing sunflower yellow, a direct challenge to her authority. When her inevitable HOA letter arrived, I responded with a masterpiece, a polite, devastating takedown quoting the bylaws' weaknesses. I sent copies to every HOA board member, sowing doubt in Margaret's reign. At the next board meeting, neighbors whispered that her face turned purple. But the real stroke of genius was the goats. Nathan found a loophole. Meadowbrook County classified Nigerian dwarf goats as pets, not livestock, and the HOA bylaws didn't mention them. I bought 5 Reggie and his 4 ladies, Violet, Hazel, Poppy, and Fernand built a pen right where the pool had been, 6 inches from Margaret's property line. The goats munched happily on the invasive ivy creeping from her yard, a problem she'd ignored for years. The neighborhood kids loved them. Parents brought carrots. Margaret, however, was livid. "Those are farm animals," she screamed from her patio. "They're pets," I replied, patting my permit. "Want to see the paperwork?" She was trapped, and she knew it. Margaret fought back with petty tactics, a security camera aimed at my yard, floodlights that lit up my property like a stadium. I logged every incident, cited county light trespass laws, and forced her to redirect the beams. Then Carl and Eddie reappeared, poking at my goats with pool skimmers from her patio. I recorded it, and the neighborhood laughed at the absurdity. Margaret's power was crumbling, her lawn grew weedy, her HOA committees fell apart. She was no longer feared, she was pitted. The final blow was the patio. I had Nathan draft a letter, sent certified mail, detailing her encroachment and offering 2 options: buy the sliver of my land at a premium, plus a written apology for the fake cop stunt, or remove the offending concrete within 30 days. Margaret ignored it, her pride too big to bend. On day 8, she showed up at my door, looking smaller, defeated. "This is a shakedown," she hissed. "Margaret," I said, "you've policed my life for 20 years, me door, my family, my grief. Now you've broken the law. You have 22 days. I closed the door, the soft click louder than any slam. On the 30th day, I woke to a grinding roar. 2 workmen were cutting her patio, the saw screaming through the concrete at the exact line of the survey flag. Margaret stood by her door, pale and broken, watching her perfect world being sliced apart. Neighbors gathered, whispering. Our eyes met across the yards. I gave her a slow nod, not gloating, just acknowledging the end. She'd built her prison, and I'd handed her the key. 6 months later, Margaret sold her house to a young couple, Tom and Emily, who adored the goats. The neighborhood breathed easier. The patio scar was covered with a flower pot. I thought that was the end, but Margaret wasn't done. A year later, I saw a flyer for a Meadowbrook Citizens for Community Values meeting, reeking of her rhetoric about zoning violations and aesthetic decline. Curiosity pulled me to the library's community room, where Margaret stood, thinner but fiercer, with Eddie as her reluctant sidekick. She pitched a Community Standards Act to ban nuisance animals and empower HOA Revenge, dressed up as reform. I listened as she ranted, rewriting herself as the victim. Then a man named Charles Reynolds, a county supervisor, challenged her, calling her plan a power grab. I couldn't stay silent. Standing, I said, "I'm Henry Coleman from Willow Lane, the man with the yellow door and the goats. This isn't about standards, it's about control." I recounted the fake cops, the encroachment, the harassment. The room went quiet. Margaret trembled with rage. Charles shook my hand afterward, promising her act was dead on arrival. Margaret's defeat was final. Her proposal fizzled, and she faded from Meadowbrook. My home is peaceful now, the yellow door a beacon of joy, the goats a daily delight. Justice wasn't just the saw's scream or her for sale sign, it was the quiet of my porch, the laughter of my grandkids, the dignity I'd held onto through 20 years of her hate. Patience isn't passive, it's a weapon, honed and precise. I outlasted Margaret not by sinking to her level, but by rising above it, using the law as my shield and the truth as my sword. What do you think? Have you faced your own Margaret? Someone who tried to grind you down with petty power or prejudice? Share your stories in the comments. How did you handle injustice or bullying in your life? Do you believe patience can triumph over hate, or is confrontation sometimes the only way? Let's hear your take.